Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon Purple Spotted Gudgeon Tank, and the gudgeon itself is sitting right there in the very top corner of the tank. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about my huge Hygrophila right here, more commonly referred to as temple plant, but my favorite name is swampweed because it really does grow like a swampweed. This stuff's getting out of control. So my regular viewers know that I always sell my excess plants. I've always got something available, usually water sprite and Java fern. But I've got somebody now that is actually asking about some temple plant cuttings. And that works out perfectly for me. I do have a few in the other room, but they look a little rough. Whereas this looks fantastic and is in need of a serious whackety chop haircut. So I'm going to be getting in here now and cutting this plant way back, and then we're going to go ahead and get some of these cuttings shipped off to my viewer. They're already aware that they're going to be unrooted cuttings, and they asked me a very good question. What is the best way to root them in? Is it better to put them in gravel or substrate and allow them to root in, or is it better to simply float them and allow the roots to develop in the open water? And I really don't know. I have always just floated them in, well, I sort of stand them upright in aerated water. As long as there's a little bit of circulation or an air stone or any kind of movement in the water, it usually develops roots pretty quickly. A lot of times I'll cut it when it's already got roots developed underwater. But in this case, it's very clearly going to be, cuttings from up here. So I'm going to get started. We're probably going to just give it an actual haircut. We're going to try to keep it a nice sort of bushy shape. I'm not going to remove the branches per se, but I will be sort of trimming it and manicuring it so we can keep it kind of small, but still a little bit on the bushy side, and then we can have a look at some of the cuttings I've taken. And so what I'm going to do is send them a handful of cuttings, maybe half a dozen of them, and let them experiment, and they can do 3 in water or 3 in gravel or 2, 2, and 2, or however they want to do it. We'll give them the opportunity to experiment with the best way to get that rooted in. So there's your before, and there's your after. So I really wound up chopping the temple plant way back, and as is not unusual with me, I wound up getting in there and doing a lot more to the tank than I initially thought I was going to. So one thing I did that's fairly easy to explain was I ran upstairs, I grabbed one of my peace lilies that I've got, started in another planter just to break up the wall there, put a little visual appeal back there, whatever. It's a plant on the wall. Again, pretty self-explanatory. I cut the temple plant way back. We will get to that in just a moment, but I do have some good news for my viewer that is expecting some non-rooted cuttings. I did get in here and remove a lot of temple plant that was growing on this side of the tank, and I got a bunch of small pieces that have roots on them already, so I will be able to ship out some pre-rooted cuttings. They'll be small, but that's what you get when you order the small package of plants anyway. They're never going to be really big plants. I did wind up saving the cuttings that I made out of here, and I put them in this glass just to give you an idea of what I have cut out of there so far. It's quite the bouquet. I will do something with them. I'll get them in a tank in the other room with an air stone or something, and I will attempt to start getting these rooted in. And this is the terminus, the top section of the plant that I cut off from right here. So that's what that looks like. So again, if somebody were interested in something that size, we would have to make special arrangements for shipping or whatever. That would not fit anywhere near my normal size shipping packages. I normally ship them in quart-sized Ziploc baggies, so anything beyond like 6 or 8 inches won't fit. Of course, when it comes to the water sprite and the temple plant, this stuff I can sort of roll into a ball, so I can put fairly large sections of that in the quart-size bags. The temple plant is a little different, like I said, so we'll have to wait and see if anyone's interested in any of those big pieces. I didn't get in and reduce any of the Java fern. You can see that's growing pretty well. This frond here is probably 15 or 18 inches long. My Brazilian sword, if you want to call it that, since it's in an aquarium setting, but that's basically just a peace lily. They're sold and marketed as Brazilian swords if you buy them for the aquarium hobby, but again, that's no different than that peace lily right there. They just need to be able to grow up and out of the water. You can't grow them fully submerged. They have to have their leaves and access to the atmosphere. I also got in and cut the temple plant back, as I said, on this side, and I took not only small pieces and little cuttings, but I uprooted a bunch of it, and you can see some of the larger stalks that just sort of stop where I cut those off. So let's come over this way. We'll do a backwards twisty spinny there, and this is what I've got from all of that. First of all, I've got all of this Ludwigia, so that will be available. I don't have anywhere to plant this at the moment, so that will also be available if anybody's looking for some Ludwigia in the near future. And then I've got all of these chunks of temple plant that are fairly significant in size and rooted in. This is probably the most significant one that is rooted. So I've got all that with all that root. It's even got new green growth on it. So again, if anybody's interested in stuff like this, my email is down below. I don't know, what we would do as far as these really large plants. Something like that would be a little more easy to accommodate. I can kind of roll those roots up into a smaller package. But anyway, I did get in there and remove a lot of that temple plant, and I got a bunch of the Ludwigia out of there. I also used my melamine sponges that I'm so fond of, and I cleaned the glass down so you can actually see into the tank through the front of it now. The front of the tank was absolutely covered in green spot algae, at least on this side. As we got over to this side, it actually tended to be more of the brown diatom. Not really sure why, but not really sure why I've got the brown diatom algae going on in this tank. As far as why there was not as much of the green spot algae, this side of the tank simply doesn't get as much light. Even when I cut the temple plant back, you can see the Java fern creates a fair amount of shade across that front glass, whereas this side is just brightly lit and wide open. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about with this tank, now that we're in here and we're actually looking at all these plants and everything, is the crazy amount of growth I get on my plants. And I get comments about this all the time, is how I get my plants to grow as crazy as I do, because I don't feed them, I don't put any ferts or foods, I don't inject CO2 or anything like that. I think my secret is the lighting. I keep a huge amount of lighting over these tanks. Most of my tanks are very well lit, and my ones that are simply lit by standard aquarium hoods that just have a little fluorescent light or have the little LEDs that come in those little hoods in the starter kits or whatever. I don't have explosive plant growth in those tanks. I have plant growth. They stay alive, and I get some growth out of them, and every now and again I have to get in there and trim them. Tanks like this that grow like a jungle, they're sitting right under a floodlight. That is not any kind of aquarium light. That is exactly what it looks like. That is a floodlight. It's a Cree floodlight. It's an LED, and it has a really, really good, high quality color spectrum on it. It's very, very close to natural sunlight. This one's a 5000K, so it gives us a sort of a nice bright white mid-afternoon sort of natural daylight look. Let me put you on pause for a minute, because I think I've got one of the boxes around in the other room, and I'll actually show you the box it came in. Alright, I actually did have one of the boxes sitting in the other room still. So that is not 150 watt, it is 150 watt equivalent. It is actually only, where is it? I'm sure it says it on there somewhere. It's probably 16 watts or something like that. I'm sure I'm looking right at it, but I can't see it off the top of my head. But it is a Cree 150 watt equivalent LED. That is the important part, where you see that 90 plus CRI. That CRI stands for Color Rendering Index, and that tells you how accurately it represents natural sunlight. And so this is 90% or greater, similar to natural sunlight, and you get a very, very beautiful full spectrum. This is the 3000K box They call that bright white for some reason. I think a 3000K is a fairly soft white, and that is what I have over my tank in the office. I've got this 3000K, which gives a nice soft sort of late afternoon feel to it, whereas what we're looking at here is 5000K and gives you a nice midday appeal. So I will see if I can find these on Amazon. I found them there before. I'll put a link down below. I will tell you now, they're kind of pricey at Amazon. I get these at Home Depot. I know the Lowe's does not sell them around here. Only the Home Depot sells them, and they're, I want to say, like $12 for one light. But for what you get, it's well worth it. And if you were thinking about buying expensive aquarium lighting for a planted tank or something like that, or you wanted a really good high quality light, you can't go wrong for $12. You just have to deal with the fact that you're going to get a light bulb that looks like that, and you're going to have to figure out how to light your tank by itself with that. So lastly, I will bring you to one of life's great mysteries. This tank has gobs and gobs and gobs of plants. It has vigorous, lush, rapid growth. You'd think that this plant, this tank would soak nutrients out of it, and you'd think I'd have to add nutrients to this tank. It has 2 fish in it, and I feed it by putting 10 or maybe 8 to 10, maybe 12 on a bad day or something if he misses a lot of them as I drop them in there. But little sinking cichlid pellets. They're a couple of millimeters in diameter. Again, I put on average maybe 10 of them a day in here, and that's it. 2 fish, all those plants, all that lush growth. And that's what the nitrates look like in this tank. I have no idea how it is that high in this tank. I've even got a reasonably thick sand substrate with lots of rocks that actually block fairly large sections from having rapid water flow over them. So you'd think I'd be getting at least some degree of denitrification going on in the tank, if not the simple fact that the plants should be soaking nutrients out of this tank like crazy. Again, I should be adding nitrates to this tank just to get those plants to stay healthy, and yet that's what I've got. My waterfall tank, which is reasonably heavily stocked compared to this tank, it's the same size tank, and honestly probably doesn't have a lot more plant growth than this tank, although it probably does because of the waterfall has spread out a larger area or whatever. But I tell you, I get the nitrates go in that tank, and then it reduces the amount of nitrates. I just figured out the other day when I'm putting my tap water in that tank, or my groundwater rather. My groundwater has a fair amount of nitrates in it right now. So every time I top off my waterfall tank, I'm adding nitrates to it, and yet they go down over time. Whereas this tank, I'll grant you, I do use the same water to top it off. Maybe that's where it's coming from. The nitrates just build up every time I'm adding that groundwater in this tank. Maybe I'm just adding more nitrates to it, and they're not going anywhere. But why they're not going anywhere is an absolute mystery to me. It's not like I don't have enough in the way of plant growth. I mean, you see what we just cut out of there, and my regular viewers will remember when I put that plant in there and got it set up and going was not that long ago. I just had to put this on here and straighten it up, and now I've already cut it back to that. So again, why the nitrates build up in this tank the way they do is just an absolute mystery to me, and I've ruled out the idea that the test is somehow inaccurate. I get that comment a lot, and I find it a little hard to swallow that it would always somehow be inaccurate on this tank and this tank alone. It always seems to work on every other tank, but this tank, for some reason, the test is always inaccurate. That just doesn't, that doesn't hold water, no pun intended. Anyway, there you go. A lot more video than I expected it to be. It was supposed to be just a simple whackety chop on the temple plant there, but it turned into a fairly long-winded, lengthy video. But that's what you get with me. You never know what it's going to be, so make sure you subscribe. That way you won't miss it or anything else. And don't forget, of course, this is my 40-gallon Purple Spotted Gudgeon Tank. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.